Hiya. You know what time it is. Woo! Get into it. We are back with Storytime with Chris. And of course, I do not own the music that you are listening to in the background, which, honestly, for any of my friends in the music production industry, if you want to message me privately and if y'all could um, make music for Storytime, that would be awesome. But I hope everybody is having a really good day. I had a good day. It was okay. I'm still alive. I'm still breathing. I'm still doing me. So, yes, okay. So, last time we were here with Howl's Moving Castle, for those who have been keeping up with these chapters, Sophie just found out that the person that broke Howl's heart, the girl he's been trying to pursue but hasn't been able to find because she found herself liking somebody else, is Sophie's sister Martha, who used a magic spell to disguise herself as her other sister Letty, where her other sister Letty is disguised as Martha to learn magic. So that was the big revelation last chapter. Now we're about to go into chapter 7. And about a quarter of the way through. But we're getting there. Let me find. Is it 21 or 22? Okay. Chapter 21 is the final chapter of this book. So we're making some good headway. Patience. Patience, young grasshopper. Patience. Oh my goodness, I totally forgot my tea. I need to grab that real fast. Oh my wonderful tea mug from Not Another Broken Egg. It's an awesome, fun little restaurant in Beaver Creek. Shout out to them. Ouch! I'm tangled. Oh, that's why. My robe hook came off. Hold on one second. Oh, my apologies. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. We are here. It's like a honey pot from Winnie the Pooh. That's kind of what it looks like. Hi, Janae. Hi, sweetie. Chapter 7, in which a scarecrow prevents Sophie from leaving the castle. Only a particularly bad attack of aches and pains prevented Sophie from setting out for market shipping that evening. But the drizzle in Port Haven had gotten to her bones. She lay in her cubbyhole and ached and worried about Martha. It might not be so bad, she thought. She only had to tell Martha that the suitor she was not sure about was none other than Wizard Howl. That would scare Martha off. And she would tell Martha that the way to scare Howl off was to announce that she was in love with him, and then perhaps to threaten him with aunts. Sophie was still creaking when she got up next morning. "Curse the witch of the waste," she muttered to herself as she got out, ready to leave. She could hear Hal singing in the bathroom as if he had never had a tantrum in his life. She tiptoed to the door as fast as she could hobble. Hal, of course, came out of the bathroom before she reached it. Sophie looked at him sourly. He was all spruce and dashing, scented gently with apple blossom. The sunlight from the window dazzled off his gray and scarlet suit and made a faintly pink halo of his hair. "I think my hair looks rather good this color," he said. "Do you indeed?" grumped Sophie. "It goes with this suit," said Hal. "You have quite a touch with the needle, don't you? You've given the suit more style somehow." "Ha!" said Sophie. Hal stopped with his hand on the knob above the door. "Aches and pains troubling you?" he said. "Or has something annoyed you?" "Annoyed?" said Sophie. "Why should I be annoyed? Someone only filled the castle with rotten aspic, and deafened everyone in Port Haven, and scared Calcifer to a cinder, and broke a few hundred hearts. Why should that annoy me?" Hal laughed. Okay, I apologize, he said, turning the knob to red down. The king wants to see me today. She'll probably be kicking my heels in the palace until evening, but I can do something for your rheumatism when I get back. Don't forget to tell Michael I left that spell for him on the bench. He smiled subtly at Sophie and stepped out among the spires of Kingsbury. And you think that makes it all right? Sophie growled as the door shut. The smile had mollified her. If that smile works on me, then it's no wonder poor Martha doesn't know her own mind, she muttered. I need another log before you go, Calcifer reminded her. Sophie hobbled to drop another log onto the grate. Then she set off to the door again, but here Michael came running downstairs and snatched the remains of a loaf off the bench as he ran to the door. You don't mind, do you? He said in an agitated way. I'll bring a fresh loaf when I come back. I've got something very urgent to see today. But I'll be back by evening. If the sea captain calls for his wind spell, it's on the end of the bench, clearly labeled. He turned the doorknob green downward and jumped out onto the windy hillside, loaf clutched to his stomach. See you! He shouted as the castle trundled away past him and the door slammed. Botheration! Said Sophie. Calcifer, how does a person open the door when there's no one inside the castle? I'll open it for you, or Michael. Hal does it himself, said Calcifer. So no one would be locked out when Sophie left. She was not all sure she would be coming back, but she did not intend to tell Calcifer. She gave Michael time to get well on the way to wherever he was going and set off for the door again. This time Calcifer stopped her. If you're gonna be away long, he said, you might leave some logs where I can reach them. Can you pick up logs? Sophie asked, intrigued in spite of her impatience. For answer, Calcifer stretched out a blue arm-shaped flame divided into green finger-like flames at the end. It was not very long, nor did it look strong. See, I can only almost reach the hearth, he said proudly. Sophie stacked a pile of logs in front of the grate so that Calcifer could at least reach the top one. You're not going to burn them until you've got them in the grate, she warned him, and she set off for the door yet again. This time somebody knocked on it before she got out there. She was one of those days, Sophie thought. It must be the sea captain. She put up her hand to turn the knob, blew down. No, it's the castle door, Calcifer said, but I'm not sure. Then it was Michael back for some reason. Sophie thought she opened the door. A turn of face leered at her. She smelled mildew. Against the wide blue sky, a ragged arm ending in the stump of a stick wheeled round and tried to paw at her. It was a scarecrow. It was only made of sticks and rags, but it was alive and it was trying to come in. Calcifer! Sophie screamed. Make the castle go faster! The stone blocks round the doorway crunched and grated. The green-bound moorland was suddenly rushing past. The scarecrow's stick arm thumped on the door, and then went scraping along the wall of the castle as the castle left it behind. It wheeled its other arm round and seemed to try to clutch at the stonework. It meant to get into the castle if it could. Sophie slammed the door shut. This, she just thought, just showed how stupid it was for an eldest child to try to seek her fortune. That was the scarecrow she had propped in the hedge on her way to the castle. She had made jokes to it. Now, as if her jokes had brought it to evil life, it had followed her all the way here and tried to paw at her face. She ran to the windows to see if the thing was still trying to get into the castle. Of course, all she could see was a sunny day in Porthaven with a dozen sails going up a dozen masts beyond the roofs opposite, and a cloud of seagulls circling in the blue sky. That's the difficulty of being in several places at once, Sophie said to the human skull on the bench. And all at once she discovered the real drawback to being an old woman. Her heart gave a leap and a little stutter, and then seemed to be trying to bang its way out of her chest. It hurt. She shook all over, and her knees trembled. She rather thought she might be dying. It was all she could do to get to the chair by the hearth. She sat there panting, clutching her chest. Something the matter? Casper asked. Yes, my heart. There was a scarecrow at the door, Sophie gasped. What is a scarecrow to do with your heart? Casper asked. It was trying to get in here. It gave me a terrible fright in my heart. But you wouldn't understand, you silly young demon, Sophie panted. You haven't got a heart. Yes, I have, Calcifer said as proudly as he had revealed his arm. Down in the glowing part under the logs, and don't call me young. I'm a good million years older than you are. Can I reduce the speed of the castle now? Only if the scarecrow is gone, said Sophie. Has it? I can't tell, said Calcifer. It's not flesh and blood, you see. I told you I couldn't see outside. Sophie got up and dragged herself to the door, again feeling ill. She opened it slowly and cautiously. Green steepness, rocks, and purple slopes whirled past, making her feel dizzy. She took a grip on the door frame and leaned out to look along the wall to the moorland they were leaving behind. The Scarecrow was about 50 yards to the rear, and was hopping from clump to heather clump with a sinister sort of valiance, holding its fluttering stick arms at an angle to balance it on the hillside. As Sophie watched, the castle left it further behind. It was slow, but it was still moving. She shut the door. "It's still here," she said. "Hopping after us. Go faster."
"But that upsets all my calculations," Calcifer explained. "I was aiming to circle the hills and get back to where Michael left us in time to pick him up this evening."
"Then go twice as fast and circle the hills twice, as long as you leave that horrible thing behind," said Sophie.
"What a fuss,"
Calcifer grumbled, but he increased the castle's speed. Sophie could actually, for the first time, feel it rumbling around her as she sat huddled in her chair, wondering if she was dying. She did not want to die yet before she had talked to Martha. As the day went on, everything in the castle began to jiggle with its speed. Bottles clinked. The skull clattered on the bench. Sophie could hear things falling off the shelf in the bathroom and splashing into the bath where Howl's blue and silver suit was still soaking. She began to feel a little better. She dragged herself to the door again and looked out, with her hair flying in the wind. The ground was streaking past underneath. The hills seemed to be spinning slowly as the castle sped across them. The grinding and rumbling nearly deafened her, and smoke was puffing out behind in blasts. But the Scarecrow was a tiny black dot on a distant slope by them. Next time she looked, it was out of sight entirely. "Good."
"Then I shall stop for the night," said Calcifer. "That was quite a strain."
The rumbling died away. Things stopped jiggling. Calcifer went to sleep in the way fires do, sinking among the logs until they were rosy cylinders plated with white ash, with only a hint of blue and green deep underneath. Sophie felt quite spry again by then. She went and fished 6 packets and a bottle out of the slimy water in the bath. The packets were soaked. She did not dare leave them that way after yesterday, so she laid them on the floor and very cautiously sprinkled them with the stuff labeled drying powder. They were dry almost instantly. This was encouraging. Sophie let the water out of the bath and tried the powder on Howl's suit. That dried too. It was still stained green and rather smaller than it had been, but it cheered Sophie up to find she could put at least something right. She felt cheerful enough to busy herself getting supper. She bundled everything on the bench into a heap around the skull at one end and began chopping onions. "At least your eyes don't water, my friend," she told the skull. "Count your blessings." The door sprang open. Sophie nearly cut herself in her fright, thinking it was the Scarecrow again. But it was Michael. He burst jubilantly in. He dumped a loaf, a pie, and a pink and white striped box on top of the onions. Then he seized Sophie around her skinny waist and danced her around the room. "It's all right! It's all right!" he shouted joyfully. Sophie hopped and stumbled to keep out of the way of Michael's boots. "Steady, steady," she gasped, giddily trying to hold the knife where it would not cut either of them. "What is all right?"
"Letty loves me!"
Michael shouted, dancing her almost into the bathroom and then almost into the hearth. "She's never even seen Howl. It was all a mistake." He spun them around in the middle of the room. "Will you let me go before this knife cuts one of us?" Sophie squawked, "and perhaps explain a little."
"Whoop!
"Whoopee!" Michael shouted. He whirled Sophie to the chair and dumped her into it, where she sat, gasping. "Last night I wished you'd dye his hair blue," he said. "I don't mind now. When Hal said Letty had her, I even thought of dyeing him blue myself. You can see the way he talks. I knew he was going to drop this girl, just like all the others, as soon as he got her to love him. And when I thought it was my Letty, Anyway, I said there was another fellow, and I thought that was me. So I tore down to Market Chipping today, and it was all right. Hal must have been after some other girl with the same name. Letty's never even seen him." "Let's get this straight," Sophie said dizzily. "We are talking about the Letty Hatter who works in Cesari's pastry shop, are we?" "Of course we are," Michael said jubilantly. "I've loved her ever since she started working there, and I almost couldn't believe it when she said she loved me. She's had hundreds of admirers. I wouldn't have been surprised if Howl was one of them. I'm so relieved. I got you a cake from Cesari's to celebrate. Where do I put it? Oh, here it is." He thrust the pink and white box at Sophie. Onion fell off into her lap. "How old are you, my child?" Sophie asked. 15 last May Day," said Michael. "Calcifer set fireworks up for the castle. Didn't you, Calcifer?" "Oh, he's asleep. You're probably thinking I'm too young to be engaged. I've still got 3 years of my apprenticeship to run, and Letty's even longer. But we promised one another, and we don't mind waiting." And Michael was about the right age for Martha, Sophie thought. And she knew by now he was a nice steady lad with a career as a wizard ahead of him. Ah, bless Martha's heart. When she thought back to that bewildering May Day, she realized that Michael had been one of that shouting group leaning on the counter in front of Martha. But Howl had been outside in Market Square. "Are you sure your Letty was telling the truth about Howl?" she asked anxiously. "Positive," said Michael. "I know when she's lying. She stops twiddling her thumbs." "She does too," said Sophie, chuckling. "How do you know?" Michael asked in surprise. "Because she's my sister's granddaughter," said Sophie. "And as a small girl, she's not always terribly truthful. But she's quite young, and, well, suppose she changes as she grows. You, may not look quite the same in a year or so." "Neither will I," said Michael. "People our age change all the time. It won't worry us. She'll still be Letty." In a manner of speaking, Sophie thought. "But suppose she was telling the truth," she went on anxiously, "and she just knew Hal under a false name." "I Don't worry, I thought of that," said Michael. "I described Hal. You must admit he's pretty recognizable. She really hadn't seen him or his wretched guitar. I didn't even tell her he doesn't know how to play the thing. She never set eyes on him, and she twiddled her thumbs all the time she said she hadn't." "That's a relief," Sophie said, lying stiffly back in her chair, and it certainly was a relief about Martha. But it was not much of a relief because Sophie was positive that the only other Letty Hatter in the district was the real one. If there had been another, someone would have come into the hat shop and gossiped about it. It sounded like strong-minded Letty not giving in to Hal. What worried Sophie was that Letty had told Hal her real name. She might not be sure about him, but she liked him enough to trust him with an important secret like that. "Don't look so anxious," Michael laughed, leaning on the back of the chair. "Have a look at the cake I brought you." As Sophie started opening the box, it dawned on her that Michael had gone from seeing her as a natural disaster to actually liking her. She was so pleased and grateful that she decided to tell Michael the whole truth about Letty and Martha and herself, too. It was only fair to let him know the sort of family he meant to marry into. The box came open. It was Cesari's most luscious cake, covered in cream and cherries and little curls of chocolate. "Oh," said Sophie. The square knob over the door clicked round to red blob down of its own accord, and Howl came in. "What a marvelous cake! My favorite kind," he said. "Where'd you get it?" I called it at Cesari's," Michael said in a sheepish, self-conscious way. Sophie looked up at Hal. Something was always going to erupt her when she decided to say she was under a spell. Even a wizard, it seemed. "It looks worth the walk," Hal said, inspecting the cake. "I've heard Cesari's is better than any of the cake shops in Kingsbury. Stupid of me never to have been in the place. And is that a pie I see on the bench?" He went over to look. Pie and a bed of raw onions. Human skull looking put upon. He picked up the skull and knocked an onion ring off its eye socket. "I see Sophie has been busy. Couldn't you have restrained her, my friend?" The skull yattered its teeth at him. Hal looked startled and put it down rather hastily. "Is something the matter?" Michael asked. He seemed to know the signs. "There is," he said. "Hal. I shall have to find someone to blacken my name to the king." "Was there something wrong with the wagon spell?" said Michael. "No, it worked perfectly. That's the trouble," Hal said, restlessly twiddling an onion ring on one finger. "The king's trying to pin me down to do something else now. Calcifer, if we're not very careful, he's going to appoint me royal magician." Calcifer did not answer. Hal roved back to the fireplace and realized Calcifer was asleep. "Wake him up, Michael," he said. "I need to consult him." Michael threw 2 logs on Calcifer and called him. Nothing happened apart from a thin spire of smoke. "Calcifer!" Hal shouted. That did no good either. Hal gave Michael a mystified look and picked up the poker, which something Sophie had never seen him do before. "Sorry, Calcifer," he said, jabbing under the unburned logs. "Wake up!" One thick black cloud of smoke rolled up and stopped. "Go away," Calcifer grunted. "I'm tired." At this, Hal looked thoroughly alarmed. "What's wrong with him? I've never known him like this before." "I think it was the scarecrow," Sophie said. Hal swiveled round on his knees and leveled his glass marble eyes at her. "What have you done now?" He went on staring while Sophie explained. "A scarecrow," he said. "Calcifer agreed to speed up the castle because of a scarecrow? Dear Sophie, do please tell me how you bully a fire demon into being that obliging. I'd dearly love to know." "I didn't bully him," said Sophie. "He gave me a turn, and he was sorry for me." "He gave her a turn, and Calcifer was sorry for her," Hal repeated.
My good Sophie, Calcifer is never sorry for anyone. Anyway, I hope you enjoy raw onions and cold pie for your supper, because you've almost put Calcifer out.
There's the cake, Michael said, trying to make peace. The food did seem to improve Howl's temper, although he kept casting anxious looks at the unburning logs in the hearth all the time they were eating. The pie was good cold, and the onions were quite tasty when Sophie had soaked them in vinegar. The cake was superb. While they were eating it, Michael risked asking Hal what the king had wanted.
Nothing definite yet, Hal said gloomily, but he was sounding me out about his brother quite ominously. Apparently they had a good old argument before Prince Justin stormed off, and people were talking. The king obviously wanted me to volunteer to look for his brother, and like a fool I went and said I didn't think Wizard Solomon was dead, and that made matters worse.
Why do you want to slither out for looking for the prince? Sophie demanded. Don't you think you can find him?
Rude as well as a bully, aren't you? Hal said. He still had not forgiven her about Calcifer. I want to get out of it because I know I can find him, if you must know. Justin was great buddies with Solomon, and the argument was because he told the king he was going to look for him. He didn't think the king should have sent Solomon to the waste in the first place. Now even you must know that there is a certain lady in the waste who is very bad news. She promised to fry me alive last year, and she sent a curse out after me that I've only avoided so far because I had the sense to give her a false name.
Sophie was almost awed. You mean you jilted the witch of the waste? Hal cut himself another lump of cake, looking sad and honorable.
That's not the way to put it. I admit I thought I was fond of her for a time. She is in some ways a very sad lady, very unloved. Every man in Ingery is scared stiff of her. You ought to know how that feels, Sophie dear.
Sophie's mouth opened in utter indignation. Michael said quickly, Do you think we should move the castle? That's why you invented it, wasn't it?
That depends on Calcifer.
Hal looked over his shoulder at the barely smoking logs again.
I must say, if I think of the king and the witch both after me, I get a craving for planting the castle on a nice frowning rock 1,000 miles away.
Michael obviously wished he had not spoken. Sophie could see he was thinking that 1,000 miles was a terribly long way from Martha. But what happens to your Letty Hatter, she said to Hal, if you up and move?
I expect that it'll be all over by then, Hal said absently. But if I could only think of a way to get the king off my back.
I know. He lifted his fork with a melting hunk of cream and cake and pointed it at Sophie. You can blacken my name. You can pretend to be my old mother and plead for your blue-eyed boy. He gave Sophie the smile which had no doubt charmed the witch of the waste and possibly Letty, too, firing it along the fork across the cream straight into Sophie's eyes, dazzling. If you can bully Calcifer, the king should give you no trouble at all. Sophie stared through the dazzle and said nothing. This, she thought, was where she slithered out. She was leaving. It was too bad about Calcifer's contract. She had had enough of Howl. First green slime, then glaring at her for something Calcifer had done quite freely, and now this. Tomorrow she would slip off to Upper Folding and tell Letty all about it. And that is where we will end for tonight. See y'all later, y'all. Have a great evening, okay? Thanks for joining in.